I'd like to call to order the Lane County Board of Commissioners meeting for this Tuesday, February 9th. Today we have Commissioner Farr attending with us via teleconference. So with that,
good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Good morning. I'd like to move to adjustments to the agenda. Do we have adjustments this morning? Commissioner Sorensen.
Just on the consent calendar, I'd like to have a separate vote on the 5C 2, I think it is. Yeah, 5C2. And we don't have to debate it, but I would like a separate vote.
Okay.
Thanks.
Other adjustments to the agenda? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to public comment period. This is where we allow up to 20 minutes for speakers to speak, giving each individual 3 minutes to speak. I'd like to, when I call your name, please come to the podium and state your name and I guess the community or town that you live in. And then I'll start the timer. First is Don Helwig. Good morning.
My name is Dawn Helwig, and I'm here representing Lane Independent Living Alliance regarding the Community Crisis Center Services RFP that will be discussed this afternoon.
Okay.
On behalf of Lila Board of Directors, thank you for giving me the opportunity to give public comment. The issues involved in this award are extremely important to our community and the consumers we serve. As a consumer-driven organization, Lila is presenting the voice of consumers in our community. We hope that the following issues can be seriously addressed before an award is made. Lila is a member of the Severe and Persistent Mental Illness Group, which worked towards the creation of a proposal for a community crisis center. The collective vision for a single hub from which all crisis services would emanate. Our community needs a single crisis hub. Location is extremely important for access to crisis services. Whitebird is in such a location close to the emergency department, bus lines, downtown, and other needed services. For over 40 years, Whitebird has built a solid relationship with our community based on trust and familiarity. Their reputation is a powerful factor in crisis services and a huge part of why we're here today. We have nothing against Columbia Care, but we firmly believe that our community would be better served by Whitebird. Because we feel that all the issues to be considered were not fully addressed, we recommend withdrawal of the RFP. Please take another look. And then I'd like to speak on a personal level about continuum of care. I have a 16-year-old granddaughter who was in crisis about a year ago. She called Whitebird. Whitebird counseled her. She, with their support, went to the emergency department and went to the Johnson unit. They referred her the next day to a community group which is called The Hub, which serves teens specifically in crisis. Today, she is a happy, functioning, content person in our community, and I wholly believe that that is because her services were all within a block of each other. She was given all the support that she needed from the services involved, which included there's a counselor for work-related issues, for sensitivity issues, for drug issues, for gender issues. I hope I'm thinking of everything, but anyway, all these services come together within a 2-block area, and we think that's significant. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Next is Bill Barton.
Morning. I am Bill Barton. I'm the president of the Upper McKenzie Community Center, and I'm here on behalf of the Board of Directors and the members of the Community Center. I'd like to speak to the proposed repairs to the Belknap Covered Bridge between McKenzie River Drive and King Road. As far as I can ascertain, the repairs are scheduled for the height of the tourist season and will result in the closure of the bridge to vehicular traffic and also river float traffic. I have also been told the county has no intention of including lighting for the bridge in this project. That situation presents a number of economic and safety issues to the local residents, tourists, and local businesses. Located adjacent to the Belknap Bridge is a 55 and older residential park which holds many seniors and their pets. These folks take their pets on daily walks across that bridge, often near daylight or dusk, and the lack of lighting on the bridge is a real safety issue at this time. I personally depend on that bridge to access the McKenzie Highway, and I'm aware of the habits of these folks and use my headlights and low speeds on the bridge, but I'm not the only one that drives it. To close the river during the height of the drift season, rafts and drift boats, is to deny many of the locals their income and their ability to produce income, which I believe runs counter to this board's stance on rural communities. It hasn't only been supporting the local guides, but also the regional folks who've been displaced by low water levels due to the drought and climate change things. So there are, a lot of other ramifications to closing down a hub like that during the height of the summer. In the interest of time and efficiency, I'll just ask that this board take a good close look at the project and find some way to fund lighting on that bridge and some way to schedule a project so as not to wind up with an accident or a situation that takes away from the livelihood of the local businesses and taxpayers up there. We're trying hard to make it work. Let's fix the bridge, let's take care of our people, and limit the county's liability and the safety issues on that bridge. Let's let our folks up there do what they do best, which is take care of each other and our seasonal guests who so value their experience. The Good Pasture Bridge would be a great example of what happened there. So thank you for your time, and I hope that something can be done with this because it has an impact on a large number of people and a lot of money coming in the canyon. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next, Kevin Matthews.
Good morning, gentlemen. My name is Kevin Matthews. My wife and I own Swan Farm Akaltekis, a horse breeding business in Dexter, and we live on Swan Farm. I want to...
Can you ask the speaker to speak directly into the mic?
I will do my best. Thank you. I want to bring an immediate issue to your attention today, if it hasn't reached your attention previously, and it touches on a larger issue. Several constituents of East Lane County have been very concerned about loose horses running on Row River Road in the Dorena area. I just want to read you some of their words. Pictured below is one of several horses who have been running at large on Row River Road near the Children's Way Charter School near Dorena. For several months, students, school officials, and people driving this road say they have complained to Lane County Animal Services and Lane County Sheriff's Department. They tell me they get no response or are told that until damage is done or someone is injured, they won't act. One horse was hit by a moving vehicle in recent weeks and hasn't been seen since. A student was distraught this week after nearly hitting another. A school bus driver witnessed two dodge a log truck yesterday. The horses are trespassing on school and neighbors' property, along with running down the county road, and so on. So I hope that coming to your attention, this can be dealt with in an appropriate, safe, and sensitive way. Dorena is part of unincorporated Lane County. More of our citizens live in unincorporated Lane County than in the city of Springfield, for instance. Lane County government is essentially their only government, and they look to Lane County for services. Lane County might look at Douglas County for a far superior model of large animal control services that can deal with the animal welfare and public safety and school safety issues in a situation like this. And please don't say Lane County can't afford the more sophisticated approach you see in Douglas County. This board has repeatedly granted millions of dollars in tax breaks to big companies, and on your consent agenda today, you're planning to spend $84,000 on a frivolous lawsuit to force a speed up of logging on public lands, primarily to benefit the same kind of big companies. Let's attend to the needs of our rural folks first and let big companies fend for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to give comment? Yeah, please come forward and state your name, please.
Can you hear me? Yes, my name is Mary McCullough, and I live in the Churchill neighborhood. And I guess it was approved that the sponsors, Hacksaw, at the, let's see, 1420 and 1430 Oak Street, Oak Patch Road, would get $10 million for having 54 male felons who've been incarcerated for long periods of time in for murder, rape, robbery, pedophile crimes, and put them in a neighborhood with women and children and latchkey kids. And I am driving taxi right now, and I pick up a lot of felons during the day, and even their own sponsors people say that this is an inappropriate place to put these men. And we have been speaking out at the Housing Council meeting, and I'm sure you've heard from me and others. And I went down to the Planning Commission to go look for the blueprints down there. They filed their e-prints. And when I told the women at the Planning Commission what this was for, their jaws dropped open. They didn't even know that they were putting sponsors, criminals, in the housing. And I've been moved back here in 1999, and I've been robbed at least 170 times since I've been here. And I believe I've told you before about my house being robbed by men with masks, and that put a knife to my pregnant daughter's neck and threatened to hurt, harm, or maim her should she say anything. And they took her driver's license and robbed our entire house. And the house that I moved to, that I'm in now, that we had to flee from the other house because of danger, the lady that lived in there, she was raped by a Eugene police officer, the one that's in that house, and it was a number of years ago, and she was compensated by the city. And I'm hoping that you all can overturn the sponsors and that they can get moved on. It's a business. It shouldn't be anything personal. They can put, some other people in these apartments. And we would like a safe neighborhood. We don't want this to turn into Portland. And anyways, you'll be hearing from us with possible lawsuits if anyone gets hurt from these men. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else? Please, Mr. Rickoff, can you say it? Okay. So with that, we will move now to item 3, which is Commissioner's response to public comments and other issues and/or remonstrance. Have any comments? Commissioner Lyken?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First comment is maybe what I'd like to do is have Greg, if you can maybe reach out to Public Works staff so we can get an update. Appreciate, Mr. Barton, your comments this morning. So we can get an update really on where we are in the Belknap Bridge, the timing, the scheduling, and I think the lighting piece. I think that's worth at least getting an update to the board to find out where we are in that process before it begins. So thanks for bringing that to our attention. Really appreciate it. The other thing I'd like to make comment really quickly to Mr. Matthews. Thank you for the information on the horses. Loose horses, that can be extremely dangerous. Growing up in Douglas County, what I will tell you, and you made a very good point about that in Douglas County, part of that is there's an incredible volunteer coordination down in Douglas County. So it's not all about financing. Douglas County has an incredible FFA and 4-H organizations in place down there. I grew up there. We had horses. We had a ranch. And I can tell you that we coordinated quite well with local law enforcement and animal control. I think part of it's the culture, but I appreciate your comments. I will tell you that once in a while a gate will get left open, and it's not very fun when you're having to travel down your road trying to round up your horses who all of a sudden are pretty excited to be out of the pasture. And that's what it amounts to more than anything else. But when you're dealing with a horse that's weighing half ton to close to a ton, that's about 15 hands tall, that's that can be a pretty incredible charging, almost a weapon, if you will, coming out of a human being. That's pretty scary. So I got to tell you, I appreciate your comments, and I personally will take that into thought consideration and see what we can do to maybe have a closer look at that. That's really important. Thank you.
Any other comments? I guess I would like to add, Mr. Matthews, thank you for bringing this to my attention. About a year ago, we did have a situation up there where we had a couple horses that were living in a rather difficult situation, very small area. I know that our staff had attended to it. I'm not aware of this most recent. It's probably the same horses in a different location, so I'll see that that we can try to respond to it. Thank you. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. So as Mr. Barton was speaking, I sent a note to Public Works, so hopefully we'll get some response back from them as to the timing of the project. I will note that a lot of times when we do work around water, we are highly restricted by the permitting agencies as to the timing as when we can do those projects. So it may not be discretionary for us to change the timing. I'll just warn you about that. Had a project in my district on a boat ramp that we had to do in the height of salmon season, which the fishing folks were not very happy about. We found an alternative for them and actually paid to have them launch at a private boat ramp and paid the boat ramp, the park system paid the boat ramp fees at the private ramp as an alternative. But it is an issue sometimes where when you talk about working in fish-bearing streams, we are highly restricted as to timing of those projects. So that may be the case. We'll find out and let you know. And loose horses are a difficult thing to deal with, and we do only have one animal control officer for the entirety of unincorporated Lane County. While I was in D.C., I got an email from somebody concerned about the condition of a horse that was actually in a field and whether that horse was being properly cared for. I emailed staff on Friday evening. They went out and checked it out Saturday morning and had a response to me before the weekend was over this weekend. So what little staff we do have is very responsive to concerns in the rural areas. And consider it, one of the difficulties, though, about a loose horse is they're seen at one point in time, called in, and by the time somebody shows up, they're nowhere in the vicinity to deal with. So it's a difficult issue. I've dealt with everything from loose horses to loose cows out in my jurisdiction. In fact, one of the first calls I got as a commissioner within days of being sworn in was about loose cows invading somebody's property. Which I didn't realize was a commissioner's responsibility as cow wrangling, but it turns out there is a branding authority that will deal with that, livestock branding authority for the state of Oregon. So that may also be a resource that's available to deal with loose horses. So I'm sure our staff will look into that pretty quickly. What I would like to talk a little bit about was I wasn't here last week because I was in Washington, D.C. With something called the United Front. It's an effort that's been going on since 1985, so that's a pretty long time, where the city of Eugene and Springfield School District, LTD, Willamette Lane, and Lane County go as a group to lobby Washington, D.C., and it's pretty unique. And of course, it's a little bit difficult to get all those disparate groups to agree on a set of priorities to lobby for. But it's been going on since 1985, and it's a unique effort. At every agency I went to and every congressional office I stopped in, everybody that spoke to us said, "You guys are unique. We don't get this. We usually will see a county come in or a city come in or a school district come in, but they never see a regional group of governments come in together, united in a common purpose. So it was a much more powerful voice. What I didn't hear, though, is I didn't hear that we're going to see an SRS bill anytime in the near future. I didn't hear that there is a pot of money waiting to be accessed for Lane County, Eugene, or Springfield. I did hear a lot of enthusiasm for things like our cross-laminated timber industry, a lot of enthusiasm for us having the 2021 Worlds here, and a lot of enthusiasm about the idea of leveraging maybe some athlete housing to be converted to housing first projects, but I just didn't hear a lot of cash flowing along with that enthusiasm. So it was a great trip. It's great to see the region work together like that in collaboration. Really impressed with Mayor Piercy and Mayor Lundberg and their ability to advocate, and even to some of the folks from the school districts and Willamette Lane on their board, sitting in these meetings with U.S. senators and being able to speak about their needs. So it was a good trip, and I appreciate the board allowing me to be absent last week from the board meeting to do that. I think it was an important trip, and it was great to have a microbrew with Congressman DeFazio. So, it was a good trip in a lot of ways to put, to kind of develop some of those personal relationships that can be really useful when it gets to be crunch time, and a bill's moving through Congress, and those people know who you are and have met you face to face when you call them. So, I just want to say, thank you to the board for allowing me to go. I know that some other board members have done that same trip. What's disappointing, though, is I don't see financial rescue coming before we have to adopt the budget anytime soon, and we're going to have to deal with this budget on our own at this time and try and figure out how we're going to balance it. We may have laid some groundwork for the future in our trip, but I don't think we're going to see anything that's going to help us before July 1st.
Anyone else? Commissioner Farr?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, if I may, on a personal note, I'm in Tucson today and this week visiting our newly born grandson, Yoali Luz Aniz Gomez Farr. And I had this report just in. He is beautiful. Not much else to say. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'm glad to be attending today.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, we'll move on to the agenda. Item 4, is there any emergency business?
There is not.
Okay. Item 5 is the consent calendar. This is generally a routine item that the Board of Commissioners will be enacted by one motion in the form listed below. There will be no separate discussion on these items. If discussion is desired, that item will be removed from the consent calendar. I remind folks that you can see all this information on lanecounty.org. If you go to the meeting agenda item and get into the agenda, there is a place to click on the supplemental that says view materials. So with that, we did have the request to remove item 5C2. Any other items?
I'll move approval of the consent calendar, less item 5C2.
Second.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Passes 5-0. Next, we'll move to item 5C2, which is order 16-2-9-04. It's in the matter of authorizing the payment of $84,000 in support of litigation based upon Oregon and California lands and the Bureau of Land Management, consisting of payments occurring in fiscal year 15-16, 16-17, and 17-18, and transferring $24,000 from contingency to materials and services within general fund budgets. General expense to pay the fiscal year 15-16 portion.
So I'll move approval of order 16-02-09-04.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Commissioner Lycan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ironically, I was having breakfast with a friend of mine. He was actually his father, and my grandfather used to do a lot of business together. It's my grandfather's company, L&H Lumber Company, at one time was a private landowner as far as timber holdings were concerned. And ironically, he said to me this morning that the greatest thing for his business would be if the federal government never harvested another tree off federal lands ever again, and that because being a private owner of timber lands, it would be extremely more profitable for him. But he also felt like that that's a selfish way of looking at it, and not a big picture way of looking at it. So interesting. I wasn't aware that this was going to be pulled, but I just thought I'd add that for as far as discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else? All in favor of the motion?
Aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
So it passes 4-1. All right, next is item 6, which is county administration.
Chair Stewart, members of the Board of Commissioners, thank you. I will introduce myself again for those in the viewing audience. My name is Greg Rickoff. I'm Director of Operations at Lane County. County Administrator Mokrahysky will be returning to the office, will actually be returning this evening for this evening's meeting in Elmira. Please note that the Public Service Building is still standing. I would also remind folks that I have 8 hours left in my tenure. With that said, I too wanted to speak for a moment on the United Front effort. I had the opportunity to join that work. It is a valuable effort to be able to have a regional presence, to speak with a unified regional voice can't be understated. Along with Commissioner Bosevich, there were several CEOs that were attending for their first time. Sue Ricky Smith from Springfield Schools, Aurora Jackson from Lane Transit District joined the effort. And I would say the work it does to help CEOs, elected officials, communicate, connect, understand one another's issues is an additional tremendous value. It gives us strength. It helps us understand when we have issues or concerns that might trip us up. It gives us a good base for trust, and that establishment of trust, I think, goes a long way. And the dollars are not forthcoming. There were some great meetings with economic development, environmental protection, but we are going to be looking at lean times. We are preparing our budget for Administrator Mokrahysky, and we are taking a serious look at where we can once again make reductions. So you will have a somber budget prepared for you this year. Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen?
I just wanted to say something about the United Front trip and how important I think it is. This originated at a happier time in Oregon's history when Senator Hatfield, Mark Hatfield, was the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And he, like all U.S. senators, gets lots of requests from lots of governments and individuals and corporations and all kinds of people for federal money to be appropriated. And what was frustrating for him at the time was that since he was chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, he was in a much better position than maybe lots of other people were in actually directing how federal money would be spent. And I think it was a sense of exasperation that he expressed. All these people are coming, and there doesn't seem to be a coordination effort. So he challenged the various regions of the state to try to come up with their own, priority list. And that could be 1 through 1,000 or 1 through 5. He didn't really put a lot of rules on this request, but our area, I think, responded quite nicely in terms of the U of O, Lane Community College, Lane County, the larger cities. It has morphed over the years to involve school districts. Some governments have dropped out. Some have been added. Kind of depends on what's going on. But I think that fundamentally it's been a good program, and that and the county has always been central to it. So I just wanted to put a little historical context on this, because maybe people don't know what's united about the United Front and what is actually meant by the word front. But we're trying to work together as a community and not make federal requests that are just independent of each of these various local governments. So anyway, I'm in favor of it, and I'm glad we're still participating.
Chair Stewart, Commissioner Sorensen, if I may, to reiterate Commissioner Bosovich's point, in every meeting we heard that this is a singular effort. It's amazing to me that this has not caught on, and perhaps it's a good secret for us to keep, but it was appreciated again and again as we talked with staff, as we talked with federal agencies. I could not foresee us doing it any other way at this point.
Okay. Mr. Legan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I appreciate the update on United Front, Commissioner Bozovich, and really appreciate the historical context as well. I think, and I think Commissioner Sorensen said it perfectly. Those were happier times back in D.C. I've had the opportunity, wow, to go back probably 10 or 11 times, I think. I don't remember anymore. Most of the time when I was mayor, and a couple times here as a commissioner. In fact, the first time I ever went back, Chair Sorensen and Mayor Tory were leading the effort from Lane County's perspective. And I would agree. Also, setting the stage, I think, is really helpful is when each of the administration, I believe, has a strong intergovernmental office. When you look at a lot of the historical pieces of that, President Clinton had an incredible intergovernmental relations office working with local governments. In fact, if you saw the dollars that came back during the Clinton administration back to Lane County, it was very significant. I think President Bush also had a solid one. In fact, one of the first times I went back when President Bush was in place, his deputy intergovernmental director grew up in Myrtle Creek. And so there was an Oregon connection, which I thought was pretty interesting as well. But that was, of course, when Senator Wyden was involved in writing the first Secure Rural Schools, those dollars that came back, and those efforts were pretty significant. And I think it's a somewhat of a sad state when I think right now there's a lot of struggle going on within the local government aspect in that coordination and that relationship you have with Washington, D.C., which I think is a sad state right now, because local government is boots on the ground government. This is the interaction, face-to-face interaction, much more than you see either back in D.C. or even in Salem for that matter. So hopefully, we'll continue to see improvements. I think our delegation, we have a strong delegation back in D.C. With our senators, with obviously the seniority of Congressman DeFazio. I just read recently that Congressman Schrader is actually listed as one of the most effective members of Congress, and I think because, again, it's his ability to work both sides of the aisle and the respect he's garnered in such a short time. And of course, from a power standpoint, Congressman Walden, who represents Eastern Oregon, is also obviously a positive we have back there. But I think overall, what I found is, I jokingly said to Commissioner Bozovich this morning, well, how was the trip to the public trough? And sometimes that's what I feel like it is, but I also really appreciate the work and the relationship we've had with our longtime lobbyists, Smith, Dawson, and Andrews. And Jim Smith and Tom Dawson, when they first started the firm, actually worked for Secretary of Transportation Goldschmidt, is when they got their start. And so they've been back there a long time and know D.C. quite well. And I think that their office has really been just really a good connection with our United Front organization over the years. So thanks for the update. I think it's good, and it's good to kind of see where we are, and which obviously is not where we want to be, but we just have to keep hammering and hammering and hammering how important our relationship is with local government, relationship is with Washington, D.C.
All right. Okay. Any further announcements?
No, sir.
All right. Next, item 7 is county council announcements. I'm not aware that we have an executive session today.
Chair Stewart, we do not. Steve Dingle is out of town. Andy Clark is available should we need his services.
Okay. Our next item 8 is actually a time certain for 10 o'clock, so we'll move to item 9, which is the Commissioner's business. Do we have announcements? Item A. Commissioner Bozevich?
Well, just tomorrow evening, there's going to be a series of meetings held around Lane County, and I'm trying to pull it up real quick. The Live Healthy Lane, Defining Our Future. There'll be meetings, I believe, here in the Eugene Springfield area. I think there's simultaneous meetings down in the Cottage Grove area, and I will be doing the opening remarks for the meeting down in Florence. And these are part of a section of the Affordable Care Act where you have to go through community health assessment and also develop a community health improvement plan. And this is that public outreach as part of that. So those are, I think you can find those pretty easily through United Way is actually the sponsoring agency for it. If you look for Live Healthy Lane and United Way on the internet, you can find the time and place. The one in Florence in particular is from 5:30 to 8 p.m. At Peace Harbor Medical Center there in Florence, in Conference Room D particularly. But and I think you can find the information about the other ones pretty quickly. It's an important piece of developing our whole community health improvement plan. We need to hear from the people what's important to them and what their health needs are. And that's one of the requirements through the Affordable Care Act, is to have that interaction with the community, so you're actually developing a plan that meets the community's needs. It's not as much of a top-down as it should be bottom-up in dealing with that. So I look forward to seeing folks down in Florence tomorrow evening, and hope to develop a good community health improvement plan. We have a good one now, but as any plan, it has to be updated and be a living document, and this is part of that process of the updating and making sure it stays a living document.
Great. Mr. Salsa?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I just want to mention also that the Eugene meeting will be held at a venue 252, which is on Lawrence Street. And I know Commissioner Stewart, you're doing the one in Cottage Grove. Commissioner Bozevich is doing the one in Florence. So the one in Eugene will be according to the same plan as all of them, but that is to work on the community health needs assessment in the first phase of the community health improvement plan, which is setting the community health priorities. Among the people attending will be the Lane County Health and Human Services staff, of course, and the mayors of Cottage Grove, and I'm not sure about Florence, but perhaps Mayor Henry and Tim Herman from Cottage Grove. So there'll be some local elected officials besides the commissioners present, and should go until about 8:15. It starts at 5:30, and should be quite interesting and valuable for the community.
Great. And I would add the Cottage Grove meeting is at the Cottage Grove Hospital there at 5:30. Other announcements?
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you. Just wanted to make a mention of yesterday's Arizona Daily Star. I picked up the Daily Star. The headline above the Super Bowl headline, strangely enough, was "Homeless Could Get Campsites, Temp Houses." And then the subheadline says, "Citigroup looks to Eugene, Oregon for some options." As you read the article, it talks about the various things that we are doing in Lane County. It mentions Lane County specifically, calls out Lane County and some of the programs that we are a part of regarding state-of-the-art, so to speak, programs throughout the nation. And Tucson is looking very closely and very specifically at Lane County right now to pattern some of their homeless response. Thank you.
Oh, that's great, Commissioner. Thanks for letting us know that. Okay. Any further announcements? Next is item B, which is the agenda team requests and work session requests. Let's start out. Commissioner Lycan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So yesterday, late yesterday afternoon, AOC Special Ops meeting, conference call, and we talked about a couple of different significant major items. One of them was the ongoing marijuana legislation, and I think that we came up with some pretty good thoughts on that, and a couple of bills going through where we want to stand on that. But after the second item was actually the Lynn County's presentation that they brought before the legislature on the minimum wage and whether that constitutes an unfunded mandate. The original staff recommendation by AOC was actually to monitor, remain neutral. But actually, what happened then is that Commissioner Unger from Deschutes County, and I was somewhat surprised, brought forth a recommendation to support Lynn County's efforts on whether this is constituted as an unfunded mandate. It actually passed unanimously, and a couple of us actually, we ended up abstaining because we have not had this discussion at our board level yet. And what I wanted to do is actually is take a look to see if we maybe have three head nods to I sent a note to Mr. Dingle, and I know he's out of town right now. At least had three head nods to include Mr. Dingle, maybe get more of a clarification from a legal standpoint whether there's legs to this or not. What AOC is going to do now is with this vote, they are going to move forward and take a look at whether this is truly an unfunded mandate, and that's where they're going to be positioning themselves. I'd just like to get three head nods to get a report from Mr. Dingle, and also maybe an update or report from Mr. Kyler and where we are. I think I'm not suggesting that we send a letter. There's already some boards that have actually sent letters in support of Lynn County and said, yes, we believe this is an unfunded mandate. I don't know. The original first blush from legal counsel at the legislature was, yes, this could be classified as an unfunded mandate. They came back and suggested they don't think it is. So I think it's at least worth the conversation from our perspective to have if there's three head nods, willing to have Mr. Dingle do some legal investigation on this, as well as Mr. Kyler to have a report back from the legislative side. And so that's what I'm asking for the three head nods, not to send a letter one way or another in support, but instead, for lack of a better word, monitor, but also gather additional information.
Okay. I'll give my head nod.
I'm in favor.
Okay.
There's your three.
Okay, so we have three supports for that. Mr. Rickoff, if you could add that.
Yes, sir.
I have an item. Yesterday I met with Mr. Bill Cluse, and he has, and I believe I've forwarded each of you a request from him. There's an issue out in the industrial corridor where PacTech and also Murphy Company are wanting to build new facilities or expand, and they're having a hard time moving that item forward. So what I'd like to request is that we schedule this for a March agenda item where we can learn more about it and see if there's something that the Board of Commissioners can do to help solve any of the potential. There's a couple questions out there that doesn't seem to be getting answered. So I'd like to ask for support to bring this back as a March item to learn more about it and see if there's something the board can help with.
Yeah, I'll support that.
I'm affirmative.
Okay.
I will support, and on with that, Mr. Chair, on the PacTech property, our Public Works office did, in my view, did an incredible job on trying to work with PacTech and their representatives on creating that opportunity for them to site there. And so I think great kudos go to our Public Works Department for making that happen. I will tell you it's somewhat disappointing to see where now all of a sudden it's being hung up by the city on whether they can move forward or not. I'm not sure that was something they were expecting at all. So I strongly support this.
Okay. Is there other agenda items or work session requests?
So
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Commissioner Farr.
if I may, I'm watching this live on the live stream and also participating live through audio. The audio that I'm participating through is about 20 seconds faster than the live. When we get to the transplant, the TSP program, I'll be watching live. I may be a little bit behind on my audio.
Okay. All right.
all right.
Mr. Bozovich?
Yeah, the Siuslaw National Forest, U.S. Forest Service, is currently in the process of developing the Indian Creek Landscape Management Plan, and they held a public hearing in Mapleton a few weeks back to a standing room only crowd that couldn't even get everybody into the room they had held the meeting in. And so they've kind of delayed some of their comment period now, so there isn't really a set comment period, but I believe that's going to come back up and have a calendar set. As soon as I receive notification of that, I may ask that be scheduled as a board agenda item and maybe even see if we can get somebody from the Forest Service to come present. There's significant concern about road closures as part of that project and denial of access to public lands of the public. And the local population from the Mapleton and Indian Creek area are greatly concerned with what the Forest Service is proposing. I don't think there's anyone that objects to the wood placement and restoration of Indian Creek, but the denial of access to public lands is a real concern there. So I would like to put that on our radar for the future as a possibility to look at, to take a stance as a board, as a cooperating agency with the federal government, and there is statutes around having to cooperate with local agencies and work in cooperation, and so I think it's appropriate for us to look at that and possibly comment. As soon as I know what the schedule is, I'll inform the agenda committee.
Okay. Anything else? So we're about 10 minutes to 10. This time I'd like to go ahead and just recess us for 10 minutes, and we'll start right back up at 10 o'clock with our time certain. All right. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. And on the Lane County Transportation System Plan update, and with us we have Becky Taylor, our senior planner and guest. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for allocating 2 hours on your agenda for this item,
Yeah.
and for a time certain agenda item to make efficient use of our consultants' time. Before we get started, I would like our team to introduce themselves.
I'm Scott Manser with DKS Associates, project manager.
Hi there, my name's David Reeser with ODOT, and I do want to mention, actually, starting next week, I'll be with the county, working as the Lane County Transportation Planning Supervisor.
Well, great. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's been pointed out to me that today's date is February 9th, not the 10th. This is a forward visioning document, 20-year document, so we're just thinking ahead.
All right. Let me ask a question. Commissioner Farr, are you able to hear Becky? You okay?
I can hear it a little bit behind very clearly on the video.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure you could hear it. Great. Yeah, okay.
Feedback.
Okay, there we go.
Chair Stewart, Commissioners, good morning, and Commissioner Farr. The transportation system plan is required by state law, as well as for Lane County, as well as the 12 incorporated cities within Lane County. As you know, you recently co-adopted Coburg's transportation system plan. And just by the way, Cottage Grove recently updated their transportation system plan, and so they'll be coming to you for co-adoption later this spring. They have a public hearing scheduled with our Planning Commission in March. Our TSP was last updated in 2004, and this update process is being funded by ODOT, the Oregon Department of Transportation, and it provides us with an opportunity to assess our current conditions and determine our future needs. We're looking at transportation needs to facilitate the implementation of the GREAT Plan, the Goshen Regional Employment and Transition Plan, and we've heard from your constituents that we need additional bicycle and pedestrian amenities in Lane County. There are more needs, which we'll share momentarily. Overall, the needs are significant, and yet you know the resources are limited. We look back to better days when we had reliable funding to maintain our roadways, but now with the loss of timber revenues and the failure of the local vehicle registration fee, our ability to even maintain our roads is dwindling. So why am I here with a forward-looking visioning document? Because it's required by state law, because the state is paying for this update process, because the state looks at local TSPs in determining regional needs, because it gives us the opportunity to assess our current conditions and future needs, and it engages our community and shows that we're listening and providing transparency in the way we invest in our transportation system. And most of all, it helps us compete for funding. As you know, we've finally got a federal transportation bill, and in preparation for the state's transportation bill, which is supposed to resume in 2017, the governor is working on this year a transportation vision. And there was a related panel discussion at the U of O last month, and I was inspired by the governor's transportation policy advisor, Carmen Four, when she said, "We are most successful and secure when we are clear about our priorities." This TSP is our 20-year visioning document. Having an updated plan will improve our competitiveness for state and federal funds necessary to meet our needs. And we're in a financial environment where we're increasingly unable to rely on predictable funding streams into one that's competitive, a process that benefits us when we can clearly show need and support from the public in the political process. I'm going to provide you with an overview of the process and some details of our public outreach, and then DKS is going to walk you through some technical findings about our existing and future conditions, and then I'm going to wrap up with a review of our policy structure. I frequently refer to this diagram as a game of chutes and ladders. Its purpose is to show that we do have a structured, deliberate process that balances quantitative data analysis with the qualitative assessment of constant public engagement and consultation with advisory groups. This shows that we're in the middle of our process, and we're anticipating final adoption by the board in early 2017. And we will have another work session with you before final adoption. The public involvement plan for this project is designed to be inclusive of a wide range of stakeholders to help the project team understand and respond to key issues and concerns. Our tools include a project website and an interactive map, which we'll share with you momentarily. And our outreach has included interviews, meetings, and work sessions with individuals and groups representing various interests throughout Lane County. We most recently had a work session with our Planning Commission, and all of these groups have provided valuable feedback to refine the work products, and there's still more outreach scheduled ahead. We've had community conversations in Oak Ridge, Cresswell, Florence, Springfield, and Eugene. And the key themes regarding public concerns and comments and needs are improved safety for all travel modes, additional rural transit service, additional bicycle amenities throughout Lane County, Regarding safety, there is a concurrent planning process underway to develop a transportation safety plan, which will be an element of the TSP. A similar structure occurs at the state level with the Oregon Transportation Safety Action Plan being an element of the Oregon Transportation Plan. And I'll come back to you in the near future with a separate work session on that safety plan process. The key distinction between these two planning efforts is that the TSP results in a project list about specific location concerns, whereas this safety plan addresses the system and results in countermeasures that employ the education and enforcement communities. Regarding rural transit service in Oak Ridge, I heard of school children who are unable to access after-school and summer activities that provide educational and recreational opportunities because they lack transportation options. When the school bus isn't operating, the kids are stuck. At the Springfield Farmers Market, I talked to a couple without a car by choice. They're able to get around the metro area by walking, biking, and riding the bus, but they can't access the rural area. And a Eugene resident and representative of the blind community says there may as well be a wall between the metro area and the coast to describe the barrier that he experiences. As you know, we don't have control over transit, but I'm continuing to facilitate conversations with stakeholders with technical assistance from Lane Transit District and other service providers so that we can explore opportunities for expanding rural transit service. Regarding bicycle amenities, most of our rural roadways have narrow shoulders. That, coupled with speeds that often exceed 55 miles an hour, makes our roadways uncomfortable for people wishing to walk or bike. And you'll hear more later in our presentation that we've identified some roadways that are popular bicycle routes and have recommended some shoulder widening. But there's also a high interest in developing off-road paths. And that level of investigation outside of our existing right-of-way is beyond the funding scope of this TSP update process, but similar to the safety plan providing more refinement to our TSP, I'm hoping to develop a bicycle pedestrian plan for Lane County to support the TSP in the future. In the meantime, some foundational work is occurring through Oak Ridge Mayor Coey's initiative with mayors across Lane County to improve regional bicycling, and Lane Council of Governments is currently facilitating those conversations. This is an example of our website to show that we have posted all of our products for public review. And this is what our interactive comment map looks like, and it's been a very effective tool in soliciting public concerns about specific locations. In summary, the comments that we've received from your constituents are nearly identical to what participants voiced at the Governor's Visioning panel held at the U of O last month. Despite being located in downtown Eugene, that event was largely represented by rural residents from Cresswell, Florence, and Oak Ridge. And Commissioner Lyken was there as well. And what the rural representatives were saying is things that I think he hears at the Lane Act as well, and that's pay attention and devote resources to rural areas. Don't just keep focusing on the urban areas. And that's where our plan really takes a big step forward to addressing that, departing from our current plan. Our last TSP was updated in 2004, and I learned that that was primarily an exercise of pulling together the project list from the cities. We're not doing that this time. In fact, we're not even including the city list in ours. We confirmed with our representative from DLCD that this was an excellent decision to avoid duplicating lists that would increasingly become inconsistent over time as the cities update their individual TSPs and respective project lists. We don't need to analyze the city streets or even Lane County roads within the urban growth boundaries because this analysis already happens at the city TSP level. Instead, we actually focused on our rural roadways. I'm turning it over to DKS to share what we learned.
Again, I'm Scott Manser with DKS Associates, Chair and County Commission. It's a pleasure to be before you today. Just to back up a little bit of the process that we've gone through, we have done a lot of data collection throughout the county. We've looked at crash data over the last 5 years to evaluate and look at how is the system currently working. And we did that analysis, and that's some of the information that as we've gone out to the public, we've presented that information. We've also done a 20-year evaluation of future growth based on statewide projections for the county. and evaluated that and came up with what are the deficiencies and needs of the system. And so as we go through this process, we've been presenting that information and then getting that feedback, and then ultimately when we come back to you next time, we'll have a list of solutions to present. But I kind of wanted to kind of walk you through the process a little bit. So as far as what was evaluated, what are we evaluating in this? We've looked at the pedestrian system, looking at ADA needs, bicycles, looking at shoulders. A lot of the facilities are rural roadways, so looking at how do the current facilities provide for pedestrians, bikes, and all modes of travel, especially freight. We looked at transit. We've got LTD on our technical advisory committee, and we've been coordinating with them on what are the gaps and deficiencies, as well as listening to the public on what are the gaps from their point of view of what are the needs to reach different milestone or mile points within the county. We've also looked at roadway health and safety. How are the roads operating today? How are they going to operate in the future? Are we providing a safe transportation system? And if not, what are those locations that are creating unsafe traveling conditions? As well as intersections. Intersections are always the bottleneck that create congestion on a transportation system. And we've also looked at a series, I think 36 or 37 intersections throughout the county that were identified throughout the scoping process, and made an additional evaluation of those locations. So functional class, one thing to take note of in a transportation system plan is you've got your freeways, your high volume facilities, you've got your arterials that are your 3 to 5 lane facilities that are really intended to move traffic. And then as you get to your collectors, that's when you're starting to see more business access, and the TSP really focuses on the major roadways within the county. Those are the collectors and above. So as you think of those, we do consider local streets from an analysis standpoint. We're looking at local streets more, what are the standards that they currently are and which ones are sufficient. But from a standpoint, really the focus of a transportation system plan is those collectors, arterials, and freeways throughout the system. The designation should match the intended use, so that's one of the things we look at from your past transportation system plan. What were the classifications of roadway? Should any of those change based on land use changes or based on other transportation improvements that have happened within this area? And again, we look at the considerations of these facilities or the cross-sectional standards. Maybe 20 years ago, the way they're being used is different today based on bike needs. So maybe we need to look at the standards and have different standards for shoulders on rural roadways. So those are some of the things that we consider. Access management standards, bicycle routes, which facilities should be designated as bicycle routes or have additional facilities based on the desire for places to be within the county. As well as freight routes. What are the land uses? Where are the facilities that have high truck traffic, and making sure that we're providing adequate lane widths, shoulders, buffers between freight and bicycles and pedestrians. So looking at those freight routes and making recommendations for changes in standards. This is just an example map showing the existing functional classifications of the county roadways as they currently exist. One of the other things we've done is we looked at the roadway health of all of the facilities within Lane County. And we did a corridor assessment tool that evaluates different components of the roadways. We looked at safety, geometrics. So the geometrics would be how big are your shoulders, how wide are your shoulders, how much bike traffic do you have on this facility, what are those volumes? Based on this facility, how much capacity can this facility provide? And based on the demand and actual traffic counts. We looked at the pavement conditions.
Could I clarify that assessment was only county-owned road facilities and not state or local?
That's correct.
No? Okay.
Yes, county facilities only.
Thank you.
So we evaluated all the county roadways based on this criteria. And really we're looking at all modes of travel in this and determine how are these facilities serving the intended users. As you can see, 60% of the county roadways scored a good condition, 27% scored fair, and 13% scored poor. And so as we start talking about solutions, we were going to focus first on the prioritization of these roads that scored poor. It could have been maybe they have a 1-foot shoulder and it's a desired bike route. It could have been they have 10-foot lanes and we have high freight traffic. It could be that the pavement's in very poor condition. So those are some of the solutions that will be coming back to you down the road.
Chair Stewart, I would just point out that the Planning Commission had some questions about these percentages. And percentages are always tricky because it's compared to what. And the 13%, it sounds like a minor issue, but given our vast inventory, it does actually capture a lot of roads. And also, it's important to note that in our weighting tool, that safety was weighted the greatest in that assessment.
We had a figure that you can look at in more detail, but it provides the facilities that scored poor and which facilities scored good. And as we start looking at the solutions and identifying what improvements are going to need to be made on those facilities that scored poorly. So roadway safety, we did some detailed analysis for both county roadway segments as well as county intersections. And one of the things we do is we look at the classification of roadway, we look at the volume of these facilities, and we compare to other similar facilities in an apples to apples comparison. So we've evaluated, and 33% of the county roadways scored exceed statewide averages based on the type of facility for roadway segments. But then when we dug a little deeper and looked at severe and fatal crashes. So these are the types of crashes that the technical term is called an injury A, and typically that means that based on the crash, somebody was in the hospital greater than 30 days based on the facility, and so it was a very severe injury in that collision or a fatal crash. And when you compare county roadways, about 15% of those roadways score higher than typical severe crash rates on those facilities. And so again, as we're looking at the safety analysis, those are the ones that we really want to focus on. Within the county, ODOT also does a safety priority index evaluation, and it compares it to all the intersections and all roadway segments within the state. And there was 2 locations in the top 5 percentile throughout the state, and there was 8 locations in the top 10 percentile. Throughout the county over the last 5 years of data, so that was from 2008 to 2012, which is when this analysis was completed, there were 34 pedestrian collisions within the county, and 6 of those resulted in a fatality. There was 38 bicycle collisions, and 5 of those ended in a fatality. And we also have our mapping showing throughout the county. You can see the red and white circles. Those were the bicycle fatalities that happened within the county. And we're using this data again to help identify projects that will help improve safety of these facilities.
So just to put it in perspective, because you mentioned this, so we have over 1,400 miles of county roadway. 15% is over 200 miles of road that's considered unsafe.
So as I mentioned earlier, we also did some transportation analysis. We looked at, back when this project was started in 2014, we did data collection throughout the county. We also have done a 2036 horizon year, so we've projected future forecasts throughout the county through 2036, which is estimated kind of 20 years from when the desired adoption date would be for the transportation system plan. And then ultimately, we've evaluated a no-build scenario, so leaving the transportation system as it is today, and we will also consider a financially constrained project package, which would be projects that are likely to be funded within that planning horizon. How is the growth estimated? We used the urban area models from Eugene, Springfield, and Florence. We used those at the gateways from the city-county relationship. We used ODOT future volume tables, which are based on historical growth over the last 10 to 20 years. And then There's also future projections that were used, and based on forecasts for the county, population forecasts within the county. And the methodology was reviewed and approved by both the county and ODOT staff for our growth assumptions. And this is just to help you understand, based on those projections, where you're expecting growth within the county. You can see, I'll use a little laser up here. You can see on Highway 126 to the east, heading towards Bend, you're going to see around approximately a 2% growth on that facility over the next 20 years. Down to Oak Ridge, in the Oak Ridge area, in this rural area, it was barely 0.1%. In fact, a lot of the growth in Oak Ridge, that area has actually seen a lot of declining growth. So there's very marginal growth in that area. So based on the transportation tools that we use, this kind of gives you an idea of where types of growth you're going to be seeing within other areas of the county.
Just to clarify, you're referring to population growth versus, or is this traffic volume growth?
The traffic volume growth was determined from one of the components of the analysis is the estimated population growth.
So, but the 0.1% and the 2.3, is that traffic volume growth?
Yeah, yes, correct.
Okay.
Yes.
That's what I wanted
to
understand. Thank you.
Yes. So, thank you for that.
I'd like to ask a further question on that. So when you show 2.3% up to McKenzie, does that take into account that is there 2.3% of the land able to be developed for growth? I mean,
yeah, and that growth, a lot of that growth in that could be tourist traffic or seasonal traffic that is going towards Bend. So as far as the analysis, I mean, typically the Portland State forecast do consider the amount of available land, but just to be careful, maybe not all of that 2.3% is actually going to be population within that area. Actually, some of that could be through traffic.
Okay, so then that begs the question for me. So we're not thinking Highway 58, which is a main freight corridor connector to east, is not expected to grow?
Not substantially.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that was something that I saw and observed as well, and we dug into that data with ODOT in detail, and that was confirmed that is the correct assumption at this time.
Okay.
Intersection operations, as I mentioned, we did a 30th highest hour evaluation and an average weekday peak. A 30th highest hour is typically a worst case evaluation, which takes all the hours throughout the year and analyzes the 30th worst traffic volume hour, and that typically would be your a 3-day weekend where you have a lot of Friday traffic heading out of town. So we did both a 30th highest hour evaluation and an average weekday peak hour, which would be more typical traffic conditions, to evaluate both conditions and make sure that what improvements we're identifying are going to provide adequate capacity for the system. Currently, all study intersections meet county and ODOT mobility targets based on current volumes. As we forecast our volumes through 2036, there were 4 intersections that failed to meet the county standards, McVeigh and ODOT standards. McVeigh Highway and 30th Avenue, which is currently signalized, Highway 99 Goshen, Territorial Highway and Highway 126, and Green Hill Road and Clear Lake Road.
And this is important to me. I think it's a piece of good news compared to many of the cities who are struggling with congestion issues. This illustrates to me that there isn't a congestion issue. I think, Commissioner Farr, when you and I were at the Northeast Neighborhood meeting, we heard Eugene staff say that unless they widen a bunch of roads, they're going to have congestion, and we don't have that similar issue with our transportation system plan.
That's a great point. And then a lot of times when we do county and city facilities, you can have a laundry list of 25 to 50 intersections where there are congestion issues, and that's something within the county that there's not going to be, there's still going to be a lot of projects, but a lot of them may be safety related, not necessarily capacity or congestion.
So I want to clarify something here, because I'm a little surprised not to see Delta Highway Beltline and even any of the I-5 interchanges like 30th Avenue and I-5 is currently failing. So we're not looking at so much those facilities because they already have facility plans.
1 second, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, just to interrupt. I acknowledge, please, to Ms. Taylor that I did hear her. That's how far behind I am. Thank you.
Oh, wow, okay. Continue, Commissioner Buzzard.
Can you kind of like explain, because there is currently a Beltway Delta plan working through the NEPA process and alternatives, and there are some plans to work on the I-5 interchanges. So is that why they're not listed in this, and they're ODOT-led projects, and this is...
Commissioner Bozos, in this transportation system plan, I probably should have mentioned this early on, we're focused on the areas outside of the urban growth boundaries, because those areas are covered within the city transportation system plans.
Okay.
Those facilities that you're referring to would be included within the Eugene transportation system plan.
I-5 and 30th, though, I think if we're McVeigh and 30th, I thought the I-5 and 30th Avenue interchange is currently considered failing by ODOT. But that's particularly at the first couple weeks of term at LCC.
Yeah, we can look into that, but as Scott mentioned, that for example, the Delta Beltline one, that you'll see that in the Eugene TSP, but I know what you're talking about with the traffic backup, particularly going to the college there down Gasoline Alley. So.
Yeah. As a former LCC board member, I know it's been failing for years, and that's why I was wondering why I didn't see that and just the McVeigh intersection come up and not the entire interchange.
It's a good point, though. We can look into that. Get back to you.
Thanks.
Yes. So we also looked at critical crash rates at study intersections, and there were 6 study intersections that exceeded average rates within Lane County, Oregon 36 and Highway 126, Territorial Highway and Oregon Road, Territorial Highway and Lorain Highway, McVeigh Highway 30th, Highway 126 and Deerhorn Road, and Oregon 222 and Oregon 58. So those are the 6 intersections that had a higher than desired crash rate, and that we'll be looking at in more detail. I'll go through a little bit of the needs, solutions, and priorities. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we're going through the needs identification process. That's why we went out to 5 different locations and got feedback. That's why we're taking the information that we received from the public on the project website throughout the county, and we're going to go through and provide a draft solutions list. And I'm going to go through a little bit more detail on what those solutions will be. And then we'll end up going through a screening and categorization of and what that means is we're going to be using evaluation criteria to help provide what we think are the highest priority projects, what you should consider the highest priority projects. And then we'll bring that information back to you and get your feedback, and we'll also present that to the public to see, okay, what do we think are going to be the highest desirable projects for the county. And then we'll do some detailed evaluation of each of those solutions. And what are those projects? What are the needs so far? There was 106 projects that were not completed in as part of the last transportation system plan that are still deemed desirable. So those will be moved forward into the solutions list. We've, in our existing and futures analysis, the roadway health, the safety concerns, the inadequate, deficient cross sections, and key bicycle needs. We've come up with an additional 34 projects, and we're just in the process now of compiling the public comments, and we may be adding some additional projects as well based on we will be adding some additional projects based on the public feedback that we received. Project needs and categories that we're going to be bringing back to you. There'll be walking and biking projects, rural modernization, corridor improvements. An example, DKS led the Fern Ridge corridor study, but again, corridor-wide improvements for different facilities. Future studies, I'm trying to think, there was a couple of future studies that...
Yeah, we had identified 30th Avenue in McVeigh as a future study. We applied for a TGM grant, and we didn't receive the funding, but we have a desire to study what's going on in that area, and in particular, LCC is wanting to make it safer for their students and faculty to bicycle to LCC on 30th.
additional spot improvements. Spot improvements would be specific locations, intersections, or curves that maybe had a higher than desired crash rates. So we'll have a series of spot improvement and also ODOT projects, which will be separated from the county of projects that we've identified on ODOT facilities that will need to be coordinated with ODOT. And one thing you won't see in there is urban improvements. And again, through our technical advisory committee, we will also be coordinating with other cities, and if there are other urban improvements that come out of this, we'll be coordinating with our partners, but those will not be included as part of the county transportation improvement list. Back to Becky.
Okay. So now I'm going to be walking you through our goals and our revised policy structure. An important tool, in addition to kind of the health scoring, kind of quantitative information that DKS has done, we wanted to have some evaluation criteria that would represent what we're trying to achieve. And so we did that by refining our current goal structure and created these 10 kind of broad categories. These have been supported by the community in our outreach thus far, but we want to make sure that you agree. These are the first 10 goals: safety, economic vitality, natural environment, equity and accessibility, mobility, connectivity, active transportation and public health, coordination, funding, maintenance, and preservation. And these are not in any particular priority order, but as we translate these into evaluation criteria, we could weight these differently consistent with your priorities. And I'll just pause for a moment to see if you have any concerns about the 10 goals or if they seem consistent with what you would expect.
So as I mentioned about helping create prioritization for the projects, we'll be using these goals to come up with evaluation criteria to help score each of those different projects of how they meet these goals.
So,
Commissioner Bozovich?
thanks. The 10 goals and broadly described, I have no issues with. As I get to reading attachment 2, which has got the sub goals,
Okay.
I have a little bit of concerns in some of the sub goals.
Okay.
One of the things that has been great about America, and a lot of people probably don't realize, is how much personal automobiles have led to our freedom and prosperity in this country, and the ability to have at-will mobility for citizens, whether it's to get to a job interview or to get to a kid's soccer game. We've developed a country that's pretty free based on that. I'm a little concerned this Drive for Zero is an attempt to minimize the use of personal automobiles,
Okay.
hedged in a safety
Okay.
issue. So, one of the things, when you get to that, I've heard some proposals around that are greatly reducing speed limits, causing intentional congestion, to make sure that if there are collisions, they're at lower speeds and all that. Having sat on the safety task force, or convened the safety task force for Highway 126, looked at the data around Lane County quite a bit. Majority of those 15% fatality and A injury crashes are lane departures due to excessive speed or other driver behavior. And the fix for that is enforcement. It's happening on roads that have good geometry, and it's happening on roads that are safe. It's driver behaviors we're dealing with, for the most part, with these fatalities. Our problems on the enforcement side, you look at the OSP barracks in Springfield's been cut back severely, yet they've been given a couple more counties to deal with. So their region's gotten bigger and their staff's gotten smaller. I don't have to remind the board here what's going on with the Sheriff's Department for Rural Patrol. People drive in this county like there's no expectation they'll ever get a ticket. And that's where we're seeing a lot of our issues with safety, and why we're seeing 30-some% above the, of our roadways are above the state data for crashes. Why we see fatalities on Pengra Road or even inside the UGB on Centennial, excessive speed, and driver behaviors like texting. It's just a real issue there, and I don't know, I'm concerned that Strive for Zero, if we try and do it with physical facilities, is going to become anti-personal automobile.
Okay.
And that's, so just there needs to be that balance, and a balance amongst these things, particularly for, to make sure we're maintaining freight movement and for economic reasons and for just the personal freedom of having a personal automobile. And that's kind of one of my, as I look at this plan, maintaining that freedom in this country of mobility is really important to me.
Okay.
So, but I do, the engineer in me always comes out. I come from, I've designed highways and built them, so I understand what it means to develop a safe facility and all that, and to try and at least design in safety. What we can do about driver behavior is another story. So I appreciate having safety be the #1 goal, and the first one listed.
Okay.
I just don't want to have that utilized as a smokescreen for a desire for social engineering people out of their personal automobiles.
Thank you for that, because I think it does help to look at how these goals are structured within the context of policies. And so you've already drilled down to one that's a proposed policy that warrants some discussion. Do you all have attachment to the revised policy, or does anyone need a copy of that?
Yeah, we have it on our iPads and computers, so.
Yeah, it should. Yeah, it was part of the board packet,
Okay.
so
It's in here.
All right.
have it right in front of me. I'm fine.
I got it.
Yeah.
Commissioner Farr, while we're probably catching up with you on our delay, do you have any questions or comments at this point? Goals or anything?
The only thing I would have a question regarding, Mr. Chair, is we are focusing on rural and not really looking at what is happening inside of the urban growth boundaries right now. But occasionally, a road may be planned inside of an urban growth boundary that should or maybe could be located outside of the urban growth boundaries. Maybe needed to be added to our TSP. And if it's appropriate right now, I mentioned one in particular. It's one, it's a connector that's inside of the Coburg UGB that dissects industrial parcels that have and the dissection of the industrial parcels that's lying in the future of the road may be detrimental to the full development of the industrial parcel. So that road may be better off developed outside of the UGB to the north. I'll just make that point right now, just to register it. It may not be appropriate to discuss in any greater detail right now.
Okay. I appreciate you bringing that up, Commissioner Farr, because that was one of the results of the Coburg Transportation Plan and their urban growth boundary discussions. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sorensen?
Thank you very much. Regarding the goals that are listed in our packet and on the wall here, I guess goal 4 talks about equity and accessibility, provide safe and efficient access. And then I think you had the word safe in there, down there maybe on goal 1 is to provide a transportation system that is structurally and operationally safe. And then, 7, create a built environment that encourages healthy, safe, comfortable, and convenient active transportation options. Now, when you say safe, that doesn't mean no deaths, right?
That's correct.
I mean, is that just a nice word? So we say we want it to be safe, but are there certain levels of danger or death that we're going to consider acceptable? How would you reconcile the word safe here when we know that there might be a trade-off between driving the speed limit on a road, but the road isn't built to handle the level of traffic that we've got? So we're talking about people that are otherwise driving in accordance with the rules, but there's just so many people on the road, and there's so many cars, and many of these roads have been designed for the number of cars, minus 50%. So how do we reconcile that? Because I think that there is a legitimate, question here about these goals are, who's going to oppose a healthy, safe, and comfortable, and convenient, and active transportation option? Nobody's going to really oppose that. But are we, in fact, building a system that is inherently unsafe, and that the levels of death and injury that you've described as leading to this, in fact, are going to be acceptable? It doesn't say that the current level of injury and death is unacceptable, so I guess we'll just keep going. So can you give us your perspective on it? Because obviously I think that there are some policy issues, and the board, in fact, might have disagreement with what is meant by this.
Yes.
And you've kept it pretty vague
so goals are,
so they're not being too controversial.
Exactly. Goals are aspirational. They might not even be something that we can achieve within a 20-year period, and they are broad. You provide staff direction on how to attain the goals through policies. So let's dive into the policies. Beginning on page 2, there are 3 policies to support the safety goal. One of them is existing and 2 of them are new. The first one, it sounds like there's some discomfort or uncertainty around the Strive for Zero transportation related facilities. And so I can come back to you on that later if it would help to have the work session on the safety plan first. This in part is to be consistent with where the state is going with their bicycle and pedestrian master plan. It strives for zero transportation facilities, and so I've been watching what's happening at the state level. They're updating their transportation safety action plan and their bicycle plan, and our plans are supposed to be consistent, and so I'm using that same terminology. But this plan, we're not proposing to drop our level of service, for example, or we don't have direction in here or recommendations about trying to pursue changes to posted speed methodology. At this point, we don't have design standards for you that would even show something different from our current practice. And I think at the next meeting, when we have our solution set and you see how we're trying to achieve safety with some of the safety issues, I think it will become more clear about what the actual impact is. But if I'm sensing some discomfort about the Strive for Zero, we can just put that on hold for now and come back to you on that when we have our solution set and after we've had our work session on the safety plan. If that sounds appropriate. Or if you want to have a discussion now so I can better understand your concerns.
What's your recommendation? That we actually put a goal out there? We might not be able to achieve it, but our goal would be, no major injuries and no deaths. What do you think of that as a goal?
No injuries and no deaths?
Well, no major injury. I believe that your colleague went over the type of injury that's considered a major injury.
Injury A is the technical term.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lycan, I think one of the...
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think, because I brought up something similar at our MPC meeting that Commissioner Bozovich had talked about, and I think where ODOT, because if you look at a lot of these goals, they really are taken right straight from what the Oregon Transportation has committed. Over the type of injury that's Okay. Anyway, taken right from the Oregon OTC's goals and objectives for statewide. And so a couple things. One of the things I don't think ODOT's done, and I think they should do what would be helpful is on the safety piece is try to bring a course, because we see what the coordination level is, but we don't necessarily see the law enforcement piece on there. And that's the enforcement piece, because I think at the MPC meeting I brought up the issue of where the traffic-related injuries or deaths compared to when our traffic team ceased here in Lane County. State Patrol has been decreased significantly over the last 30 years. And I think that's where I think Commissioner Bozovich is correct on that piece of it. Having that coordination with the public safety piece, I think, is missing. And that would be helpful. I have no issue with striving for that. One of the things that I saw at our AOC conference in our transportation committee was in particular Washington County and Clackamas County on rural highways, and that is their pilot and experiments with roundabouts on rural highways, which we don't necessarily do here in Lane County. Now, within the cities they do, and I think that they have helped in the sense of, as far as accidents are concerned, if an accident occurs, you don't want to see an accident occur, but it's a fender bender. And it's not a issue where you have life at stake here. So you never want to see that. It really comes down to the education side. So those are one of those things that I would highly recommend staff take a look at as far as, is there some areas in Lane County where a pilot project of maybe potentially looking at a roundabout, would that fit or not? That I don't know. And that's something I think that would be worth it. As far as you brought up the bike ped piece, and I think that that's important. One of the things that we talked about in the bike ped committee that's now out for public comment before the OTC actually adopts it. The one thing that we didn't want to get involved in is the us versus them. And we really talked about this should not be cars versus bike ped. Bike ped should be part of the entire system, because I think that that's where a lot of the millennials are going. People are interested maybe in having an opportunity to walk to work, to bike to work, however that may work. But we also commented, and this is where I think it was very helpful having some local elected officials involved in that, was also commenting that our fear was the bike ped was going to be Portland-centric and good luck for everybody else. We really kept that, I think, at bay and talked about, okay, this might be good for Portland, but how does this work in Hermiston? And how does this work in Union County? And how does this work in Lake County? And so that was one of the things. So we left it broad for that reason, to have more local conversations as far as that's concerned. So I think we can strive for these goals. I don't think there's a problem with that. Maybe the language should be tweaked with a little bit. But striving for those goals doesn't mean that, sure, I think all of us would like to have it where you don't have fatalities involved here. Commissioner Bozovich brought up something I notice all the time now. It's stunning to me on how many, and it's usually younger drivers. You'll drive by them, you look over, and there they are doing this while they're driving, texting away. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can barely listen to the radio and drive. So how do you do that? Well, I can still play air guitar and drive, okay. But anyway, but how do you text, and how do you, I see this constantly, and so it's the behavior issue, and that's, I think, where the enforcement piece comes into play. So if we can try to coordinate with the law enforcement side of that, I think that would be extremely helpful. But I also think that would be helpful from the state's perspective as well, because I think that's the component that gets missing at times. The public health component has really we've been striving for that. That has been added and added. I have no issue with that. I think that's great. But when you look through the language, whether it's ours or whether it's the state, the piece that's missing is law enforcement, which again goes to the actual enforcement of, and then that goes right back down. I think you have it listed number 9, resources.
Yeah.
And that's that ongoing conversation we have to have with both not only the local but with the state delegation as well as the federal delegation.
Yes, thank you.
Chair Stewart and Commissioners, if I may add a few words from the state's perspective on this. We've been serving on the project management team, and I think these are very useful comments that we're receiving today. And in terms of the Strive for Zero, I think one thing that I'm hearing from you is collectively perhaps is that we don't want to necessarily focus it just on bike ped. I heard Commissioner Bozovich express wanting to make sure we still allow the automobile and don't inhibit freedom of movement, things like that. So perhaps our project management team could work on some language here talking about striving for zero fatalities for all modes, and so that would be inclusive of automobile, freight, bike ped, etc. I think that's something that we can try to clarify. And then hearing you also talk about the enforcement piece, while it is listed there in the policy 1A, I think we can definitely come back after hearing this from you and talk about ways that we can bolster that. And I think that's supportive of the statewide policies that are currently being evaluated and updated.
Chair and Commission, one thing I can respond to is ODOT actually is in the process of finalizing their transportation safety action plan, and it's similar to the Vision Zero. It's basically the same goal, is to eliminate fatal and severe crashes, but they are really involving the enforcement piece of this, realizing, and Commissioner Bozovich, you've hit the nail on the head. In fact, I believe in the ODOT plan, the two biggest things that are leading to fatal and severe crashes in Oregon are drinking and driving, which is impairment, and it also has a component of enforcement, and speeding are kind of two of the ones that are rising to the top, which, you can do all the engineering in the world, but the impairment is the piece that's very challenging to deal with. And so that Vision Zero, there's many different components of it. There's the engineering side of it, there's the enforcement side of it, there's education, and those are the things that those are the overall goal, and we may not be able to accomplish all those in the transportation system plan, but it's part of the piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, until Google perfects their cars, there's going to be a human behind the wheel. And one of the things is modifying driver behavior, and part of it's through education, but part of it's just knowing there's going to be an enforcement action, whether it's the DUII or whether it's the person that wants to text or the person that just ignores the speed limit. But that's really I wanted to bring up the Strive for Zero mostly, and just to kind of bring up that whole aspect of the balance between the goals, and mobility is a goal that's in there. As a commissioner, and having lived through trying to fund transportation, we had our very unsuccessful vehicle registration fee effort. One of the things that we hear constantly too is, everybody thinks bike ped improvements are great, but they don't pay their freight. And why don't we have a bicycle tax and all that stuff? So we have goal 6C in here, which is and it's another new goal about encouraging off-street trail networks to be integrated with the on-street pedestrian, and that is one of the goals. And if you go into some of the Strive for Zero stuff, is to separate bike ped from actual traffic systems. And what we used to, when I first started engineering roads, call a safety shoulder is now called a bike lane. And so I've tried to explain that to constituents that it actually functions for automobiles too. As soon as you separate it, then it's definitive that that is specifically only benefiting bike and pedestrians who are not paying gas tax or vehicle registration fees. And that's where we start getting the questions, is why are we funding that through a mechanism that's only funded from automobiles and trucks to support that side? So one of the balances in that has to be, how are we going to fund those facilities, and is there going to be some kind of new funding stream for those separated facilities? As a cyclist, it's great, and I also, but as an experienced cyclist, and I would consider myself more of the road warrior style, I don't have this comfort riding on roads with traffic. In fact, our trip to D.C., I was almost impressed with the people that were willing to ride in D.C. traffic. That was a little bit beyond my comfort zone, but there are plenty of them. In fact, it kind of seems to be a very large trend, and that's not exactly a weather conducive city to riding year-round, and it seems to be a very large segment because it's easier to get through traffic on a bicycle in D.C. because it's so congested. A lot of times, which is kind of where it looked like some people were taking their life in their hand passing traffic on a bicycle. But it was pretty interesting to watch that. So, one of the things as we look at all, I think the goals in concert and in balance with each other all work pretty well. But I just want to be careful that somebody can pull one of our goals out and really, beat on that goal alone, because alone that goal doesn't stand very well. Like off-street trail systems, the first question most of my constituents ask is, why do I have to pay for that? I'll never ride a bicycle. I've got a hip condition. I always have to drive myself. I can't walk long distances. That sort of, and I live out in Elmira like I am, and there is no bus service. So that's the balance there. One thing I would kind of want to get back to a little bit, though, is also in the connectivity. We really need to be talking to, you say we're ignoring the urban growth boundaries, but there has to be a really close connection with all that, particularly as I start looking at 30th and McVeigh. That possibility for a safe route is actually going to be coming out of the urban growth boundaries. That's either got to come out of Springfield or come out of Eugene to make that safe connection to LCC. And they're going to have to be a significant partner in developing those. My guess is it's actually going to come out of Springfield because most casual cyclists are not going to ride over 30th. So that's kind of, and that's already got a fairly wide shoulder on it, and it's somewhat accessible. But we've had fatalities there, for various reasons. But also the opportunity to coordinate with LTD and the bus rapid transit line that could possibly come south there, should there ever be a larger draw than just LCC for bus rapid transit. If it stretches down to Goshen and we have employers on the far end of that, developing that route in concert with a safe bike ped route, in that corridor. And it's going to be a significant effort. But those sort of coordination efforts between our adjoining TSPs and all that, somehow or another can be expressed in the goals would be great, because I think particularly when we get right around the perimeters, like Coburg even, a small city where they've got an issue of bypassing Coburg Road around to get to I-5, but they need to get some of that traffic off of their main street, and they need that east-west connector. It looks like it's actually a better possibility if there's some kind of Goal 14 exception taken and that actually runs across unincorporated Lane County versus running inside the UGB there and coordinating between their TSP and ours. So those coordinations right around the perimeters of the various UGBs and those TSPs and then all the agencies involved gets a little bit more complex when you get to 30th, because now you're talking LTD, Springfield, and Eugene that you're trying to work with, and the MPC in general. A little less, complicated if you're just dealing with, say, Junction City and how some of our roads function around Junction City. So that's kind of some of my comments around the goals is I hope people will look at them as they have to be balanced. No different than the statewide planning goals for land development and land planning. The goals actually conflict with each other. The Goal 5 resource might conflict with the needed housing, and it's how you balance those. But if you take one by itself, you're overbalance the plan, and we have to remember somehow or another there's maybe a statement or preamble that talks about balancing the goals might be useful. That a single goal shouldn't be taken by itself that it has to be in balance with the rest of the goals.
Thank you. And I think that's consistent with our draft criteria, trying to translate these goals. We didn't put them in any priority order, and our thought around developing criteria was that they would be weighted equally, so that's consistent with that. So you did hone in on the other new policy proposed under connectivity. It's on page 4, item 6C. And so I appreciate understanding the concern about context there. The intent of this was to not have on-street and off-road be in competition with each other, but that they're recognized as complementary and that they don't necessarily need to be in competition because the funding sources may be very different. Off-road paths might be eligible for a funding stream that an on-road system isn't. So that was the intent, but I'll look at all of these more carefully to make sure that they wouldn't jeopardize any one particular mode, and that our criteria would be weighted equally. That's what my general sense, and also to not finalize the safety related policies until we get more clarity with you in our subsequent work session on transportation safety plan that looks at enforcement, education, and kind of the broader concepts that are more akin to Vision Zero. And we're not using that terminology just because we want to customize this to meet our local needs rather than follow any particular brand. The other policy revision that isn't apparent that I wanted to point out, because this is something that came up, Commissioner Farr at the Northeast Neighbors. This is on page 6, policy 9C. Was that right? No. No, it's on page 5, policy 8A, item 3. So overall, this is existing policy to provide direction to staff in the cases where there's an inconsistency in, based on a jurisdictional issue. And apparently what many of you hear from the development community and even cities is frustration about if they need to upgrade a Lane County road to urban standards within the urban growth boundary, that they're held to county standards. So the current policy is we defer to the cities on local streets, but we retain our standards on arterial and collector streets. This revised policy would defer to the cities for all street classifications, with the thought being if they have to upgrade it to urban standards and at that time, then the cities are willing to assume jurisdiction, then it should be to their standard, and it omits that, I think, constant tension that we've been experiencing with our different standards. Make sure that you're comfortable with that change.
I think that's a good change, having experienced Irving Road, Irvington, and Prairie Road improvements.
Risk of interruption, but I concur with what Ms. Taylor said regarding the city and the county policy.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're hearing Commissioner Farr concurred, and it sounds like
Great.
Commissioner Bozovich believes that's a good recommendation.
Thank you. So thank you. It looks like you've all reviewed attachment 2 and in advance, so I don't know if you have any other questions about that or if we'll just come back to you with a refined product later.
I might just, one point, we've talked about safety quite a bit. I wonder if there's any value in considering separating the different safety components. So when we're talking about our transportation system and designing, we try to design for safety purposes, but as was pointed out here, we can design what we think is the perfect road and probably is the perfect road, but yet, driver error, whether it's whatever happens to create a driver error, is not going to guarantee that we're not going to have some sort of a fatality or an issue there. So maybe we still want to achieve the zero fatality, and we take it in the components of design and implementation to then the education, law enforcement, and short of, I think, driver error, we can achieve that or attempt to achieve that.
Yes, thank you. So our next steps, we'll be working on draft solutions. We'll have another round of public outreach, and then we'll have another work session with you later in the spring. And before then, I'll come back to you with a work session on the safety plan. In Clackamas County, I think Commissioner Lycan, maybe you mentioned that. I was thinking of inviting Joe Merrick even to come and talk about his experience with his safety plan for the county. Maybe we can learn from that as well. And I also wanted to check in to see if you're interested in briefings on some of the state updates with the bike ped plan or the safety plan. The MPO and the Lane Act have been receiving presentations. We could either forward you links or invite someone here or just write a memo, but just wanted to provide you with the resources that you need for context in this process.
Okay. Thoughts on that?
It'd be interesting to hear from the folks in Clackamas. But, yeah.
Okay, great.
Sure, Sorensen, no?
Okay.
Okay.
Do you have any other questions?
Any further questions? Commissioner Farr, do you have any questions or comments as we close this item?
No, thank you. I'm up to date.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your feedback. This has been really helpful.
All right.
Look forward to coming back to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. I believe that is all the scheduled items this morning. I guess we do have item number 11, any other business. Is there? Okay. I'm not seeing any. So with that, we do have this afternoon a 1:30 public hearing, a 3 o'clock time certain Health and Human Services item, and then a 6 p.m. tonight we have a meeting at Deep Woods out in Elmira. So with that, we'll go ahead and recess until 1:30.